So welcome to the refresher training for SREB Science Unit 1, Lesson 1. And this is the lesson where you will introduce the entire unit to the students and get them to start thinking in a disciplinary way. So what students will do in this particular lesson is to be introduced to the expectations of the course. And so this is really where you need to stress to them that they're going to be learning at two levels here. So they need to learn about disciplinary literacy in the sciences and to learn the science content. And in this unit, the science content is diet and nutrition. So to begin the unit, we have an introductory activity that students will do where they will evaluate science claims. So students will actually get started in thinking about science in a scientific kind of way. So what do you need to know? So the first thing that we ask you to do is to ask students to reflect on previous science learning. A lot of students you'll find really think that science is all about memorization, or they had some troubles learning science earlier, or they don't really know how to approach reading science text. So it's important for them to understand that they'll be supported in learning new ways to approach reading and writing in science with the express purpose of preparing them for college level work. So as they go, they really need to be thinking about learning at two levels. So they need to really understand that they are learning the science content, but they're also learning how to learn. So those disciplinary strategies that will help them learn in the sciences. So the first strategy that we're going to teach them is juicy sentences. So they're going to be unpacking the ideas of disciplinary literacy from a short piece in their academic notebooks. And they'll be looking at, what is the sentence that really grabs you? What is that sentence that really helps you understand this particular thing that you're reading? And this is a strategy they're going to learn across all three of the literacy contents in Literacy Ready. And it's a really great idea for them. It's not looking at main idea. It's not thinking about it in that way. It's saying which sentence of this section that you're reading is the one that really grabs you. So they'll start out with that, where we'll show them the juicy sentences that we've picked out, but toward the end, we want them to pick out their own. So it's a supported way of sort of thinking about what's important in your reading. They'll also learn two science ideas about what makes reading and science specialized. So one is to be on the lookout for long noun phrases, and typically these are ideas that have been presented earlier as a process and now are kind of put together in a noun phrase to describe some kind of new idea. So there's a couple of examples in their academic notebook and in your lesson plans to be talking about when you're reading in science. Be on the lookout for those long noun phrases because it helps you chunk ideas together so you know what that verb is acting on when you see that all these nouns together are actually one idea. The other thing that they're going to get started thinking about is multiple representations of concepts. And so we show them 4 or 5 different examples of how you can represent a molecule, with the understanding that there's no one way they need to learn it. They need to understand all of those representations. And as we go forward in this unit, they'll be learning some ways to transform science information so that they can look at it in multiple representations, in visual, in text, in animated ways, so that they can see how the processes work and that they can become flexible in their thinking about how to represent scientific concepts. They'll also be putting these ideas into practice. So throughout this unit, the strategies are recursive. We come back to them again and again. And as students get more comfortable with them, they will become more fluent in how to use the strategies to learn the science processes. So that's something that you want to keep in mind, is that it's not we teach it and it's done. We're going to teach it and come back to it and come back to it and come back to it so that students really build an understanding of how they can use the strategies in their learning. Students will be reading in multiple genres in this lesson. So we need to sort of debrief on what they're doing. So the first thing they'd look at is a video that's a commercial, and it's actually on a website called brandfailure.com. And that's actually something to bring up, right? Why would this commercial that used to be on TV now be on this website? They'll also be reading several pieces in a textbook, one that is like a text featurette that the textbook authors wrote, and then the other one is an excerpt from a newspaper article. So even within the textbook reading, there's two different genres there. So textbook reading strategies and then how to read a newspaper article. And then they'll be reading an abstract of a research study. And the really important thing to keep in mind when you're talking about that abstract is that you don't need them to understand every single word in the research study at this point. They just need to be able to tell you what were the questions that the researchers were looking at, what did they do to study those questions, so how did they conduct their study, and then what did they find and what were their conclusions. Students should be able to go into that abstract and pull out that information even if they don't understand every single word. They can get a really good idea of what the researchers were looking for, how the study was conducted, and then what they found. So every time you hit a new piece of text, a new genre of text, it's a good idea to debrief with students, to talk about the differences in the ways they approached the reading in each piece. And a lot of times throughout this unit, you'll find that we sort of have a guiding way of getting students into the reading so that they have a purpose every single time, right? So your purpose in reading the abstract is to find those 4 pieces of information. Your purpose in reading the newspaper article is to find out, what is this new product and what does this newspaper author think about this product? In addition to reading these different genres, they're going to be looking at evaluating the science claims made in each piece. So when they're looking at the 5-hour energy video, you might want to start out with what are the claims being made? And one important thing to do is to have students state the claims before they evaluate the claims, because they're going to want to jump right to evaluating. So what are the claims being made? Get all those out, and then okay, what do we think about these claims? So the same thing in the oxidizer article. So why does the oxidizer company use the research study that clearly states that there's no effect from oxidized water? So why did they use data that was actually really meaningless to say, oh yes, we need this oxidizer product? And so this is getting students starting to think about science in the news. Their final product in this unit is to create an informational pamphlet on some topic related to diet and nutrition. And they're starting right here in the very first lesson of the very first unit, thinking about how science is represented in the news and how we as consumers need to think about what we're seeing, what we're reading about science. So like in the 5-hour energy video, why is the person dressed the way she is? She really looks like she's in a lab coat, even though she really isn't. There's like a giant stack of papers next to her. What's that doing there? So getting students starting to think about those ideas. And the overall concept of why is it important to evaluate claims in science? As students read these texts, as they start looking at evaluating science claims, we not only do it through class discussion, but there's also a really good checklist in the academic notebook that they can use as they read science in the news. So even as they're preparing for their final project, they can come back to this checklist to see, some of the questions you ought to be asking when you see science in the news. There's also a claims evaluation and conclusion chart in their academic notebook that helps them sort of organize their thinking about the multiple pieces that they read. So what are their claims? What do they think about those claims? So how do they evaluate them? And then what is their conclusion of that overall piece based upon the claims and evidence that they're finding? It's a good way to get them starting to think about how scientists view data. How do they think about it? How do they evaluate it? This lesson ends with them talking about their overall ideas from putting together the claims and conclusion chart from all the different pieces that they read. And in terms of assessments, there are a couple of evaluation rubrics in the lesson plan that you can use. And basically at this point, it's sort of just, are they getting started? Are they thinking about learning in the sciences and getting into the content? Because this is this hook. We're trying to get them interested and invested in this unit. And again, they need to understand that this is not their regular science class. This is a science literacy class. So reading, writing, thinking about science. And that ends lesson 1.